I'm sorry for that interruption. Uh, it seems that this keyboard is so sensitive that whenever I make the slightest bump, it stops it and I've got to start over again. Okay, so here we are. We are still in the 25th Amendment, and we're still in fact, we just started Section 3. So let's make believe we've not done anything with Section 3, and let's begin again. Whenever the President transmits to the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President. Okay, here's a scenario. This has never happened. So we don't know exactly how this would work, but we think that this is the way it would work. Okay, the president went to the doctor and it's discovered that he has a brain tumor. And he's going to have to be operated on, and he's going to be unconscious for a week, right? Well, you can't be president if you're unconscious. So what should the president do according to Section 3? He should write a letter. He should write a letter that goes to the President pro tem of the Senate and to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And in that letter, he'll tell the story of what's going to happen and how he won't be able to be the president, right? And so when he goes into the operating room, and from the point that when he becomes unconscious, the vice president will take over. He will be the acting president of the United States, and he will serve as the acting president of the United States until the president gets better. Right? He wakes up. He's healing, and he sits down and he writes a letter to the same people, by the way, the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. And in that second letter, he says, I'm well, I'm able to resume my duties. And so he becomes the president again. But he doesn't become president until he sends that second note. All right, let's read that again. Whenever the president transmits to the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, that's that second note, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President. That's pretty straightforward, right? Why is that there? There's a real reason why that is there. Back when Woodrow Wilson was President of the United States in the 19-teens, he had a stroke, and he was in really bad shape. He was unconscious part of the time. Now, the 25th Amendment was not in effect then, right? His wife, Mrs. Edith Wilson, took it upon herself to protect her husband. Everybody knew that Wilson was sick. Now, don't misunderstand me. That was not the secret. Everyone knew that Wilson was sick. What was secret was how sick he was. So, obviously, he couldn't go to the Oval Office. He worked from home. But he wasn't working from home. He was in La La Land. And so, members of the Congress would visit the White House and request a meeting with the president. And Mrs. Wilson, who was sharp, she would say, well, now the president is really not having a good day. Well, of course he wasn't. He was unconscious. The president is not having a good day, and so it probably wouldn't be a good idea for you to disturb him. But if you'll tell me what you wanted to say to him, as soon as he's feeling better, I will tell him what you said, and I will make sure that his answer is delivered to you. Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Then, at that point, she would make the decision based on what she thought her husband would do. And everybody thought it was coming from Wilson. It wasn't. That did not become common knowledge for years. And Section 3 of the 25th Amendment is a direct result of that little game that Mrs. Wilson was playing, right? No longer would that be possible. All right, Section 4. Whenever the Vice President, now Section 3 deals with if the President knows that something is getting ready to happen and he voluntarily shares that information with the President Pro Tem and the Speaker of the House, right? Okay. But what if he's unwilling to admit that something is wrong? Section 4 deals with that. Whenever the Vice President and a majority of either of the principal officers of the executive departments, that's a fancy term for the President's cabinet members, the directors, the principal officers of the executive departments, that's the cabinet, right? Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary of the Treasury, Attorney General, all those offices. Those are all cabinet positions. Or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the President Pro Tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. Okay. This has never happened either, but it could. Presidents tend to be old men like me, or older, right? Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, they're both, and look, come on, that's white hair, right? Wrinkles. They're older than me, and I'm older than dirt. One of the problems, one of the diseases that we see more and more and more of in America these days is Alzheimer's. It's a terrible disease. Most of you have a family member or a neighbor or an acquaintance who has Alzheimer's. It is an evil disease. I've had it in my family, and it just breaks your heart. My mother-in-law has it right now. We're not looking forward to the day that she doesn't recognize us when we walk into her room. But let's say, and one of the things, and Alzheimer's, it affects different people in different ways. Some people, I mean, the whole idea of Alzheimer's is memory loss, right? Some people, they literally don't know that they have Alzheimer's. They have forgotten that they have Alzheimer's. Boy, that's even worse, to not even know that something is wrong. What happens if the president has Alzheimer's and he doesn't know that he has Alzheimer's? He's forgotten. Somebody told him. Somebody tells him every day, right? Oh, you got Alzheimer's. And then he immediately forgets it. He thinks that everything is normal. He thinks that everything is okay. But the people around him know that something is wrong. Do you want a president of the United States who has a disease like Alzheimer's? I don't. And it doesn't matter whether he's a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative, black, white, female or male. It doesn't matter. I don't want somebody in the Oval Office with their finger right next to the button that can destroy the world. I don't want that guy having Alzheimer's. So, if the president doesn't realize he's got it, or if he realizes and he doesn't want to admit it, does it matter? He's got Alzheimer's, right? It doesn't really matter. The vice president can take steps to remove him from office. Not just the vice president. Let's read it again. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers, the cabinet, or of such other body, whatever the heck that means, as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the President Pro Tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. Right? The President just got fired by the Vice President and a majority of the cabinet after they send letters explaining the problem to two people. Same two people, by the way. It's always the President Pro Tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. It says that the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. Now, God only knows how this would work. I mean, are they going to send the Capitol Police into the Oval Office and escort the President out? I don't know. It doesn't talk about any of that stuff. It just says that the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. Now, this is America. We've talked about how due process is the rule of our legal system. You have the right to be accused, to face your accuser. You have the right to be accused of something, right? Well, the president has those rights too. Now, the remainder of Section 4 talks about these responses that the president can make to the actions that have just been taken by the vice president and the cabinet and the president pro tem and the speaker of the House. Thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tem of the Senate and the speaker of the House of Representatives his declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide transmit within 4 days to the president pro tem of the Senate and the speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Okay, now what starts here is what in modern times we refer to this he said, she said, right? Yeah, back and forth, back and forth. Now, remember what has already happened. The vice president and the cabinet have sent a letter to the president pro tem of the Senate and the speaker of the House saying that the president can't do his job. And the vice president is now the president of the United States. But the president has the right to defend himself against these charges. What if the president says, look, I don't know what's going on with the vice president, but there's nothing wrong with me. I'm doing my job just fine. Leave me alone. Now, he has to say that to the right people. For example, to defend himself, the president has to send that letter to the same two people in the Congress. There's the president pro tem of the Senate and to the speaker of the House of Representatives. And in that letter, he says, I'm good. I'm good. He gets his job back. Unless, but he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the vice president and a majority of either of the blah, 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 don't have to read all that again, the cabinet members, right, transmit within 4 days to the president pro tem of the Senate and the speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable. So what they do, okay, first set of letters says the president is unable. Second set of letters comes from the president, and those letters say, oh yeah, I'm fine. The third set of letters, which must be written within 4 days of that second set of letters, the next set of paper says, look, it's tragic, but the president really is not capable of doing his job. Now, at this point, it seems that the letter writing campaign is going to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth forever, but it doesn't. It stops right here. The letter writing stops after that third set of letters. And the Constitution then talks about who is going to settle this issue. And it does it the way it always does it. It leaves it up to the Congress because it says, thereupon Congress shall decide the issue. Assembling within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session. All right, so if the Congress is in session, if the Congress is in Washington, they will immediately, it doesn't say this in so many words, but the implication is clear. Whatever they're working on, nothing can be more important than who is going to be the president of the United States. So the assumption is that whatever they're working on, they're going to drop that, and they are going to make the decision with regard to the presidency. Now, and they've got to, now, if they're not in Washington, then they have to start gathering within 48 hours. Now, I'm sorry, I said that incorrectly. At the end of 48 hours, they have to be back in Washington. That's the deal. Okay. At the end of 48 hours, they have to be back in Washington and start so they can start debating this issue. Now, if the Congress within 21 days after receipt of the last written letter, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by a two-thirds vote of both chambers that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall continue to discharge the same as acting President. Otherwise, the President shall resume the powers and duties of his office. Okay, now, let me clarify this. The Congress has 48 hours to get back to Washington. Well, I mean, if they're there already, they start working on this immediately. If they're out of town, they got 48 hours to start working on it. They got to get back and start working on it within 48 hours. Once they start working, they've got 21 days to make a decision. This debate cannot go on forever and ever and ever. They got 21 days to make a decision. And when they vote, what does it take to kick a president out of office permanently? A two-thirds vote in both chambers. Now, it doesn't say two-thirds of those present, does it? It's two-thirds of the membership. If they get a two-thirds majority in the House and a two-thirds majority in the Senate, then the president he's lost his job. Now, this is not saying that he's done anything wrong, right? It's probably because he's sick. But nevertheless, he's gone. He is now the former president, and he has no more recourse. There are no more appeals that he can make. He can't appeal to the Supreme Court, none of that stuff. His options have been exhausted, and the vice president continues and completes his term of office as the acting president. Now, if there's not a two-thirds vote in both chambers, the president gets his job back, and he goes back into Oval Office, and he's the president again. A very complicated scenario, especially there in Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. Okay. The 26th Amendment. We're moving right along. We're going to finish the Constitution with this video lecture. I now know that because we're almost done. The 26th Amendment was created in 1971, and it says, the right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. Until the 26th Amendment was ratified, the states had control over the voting age. Some states had a voting age of 21, some had one of 20, some it was 19, some it was already 18. But it was inconsistent, wasn't it? It varied from state to state. I suggest that you reread the 10th Amendment again, right? A power that's not specifically given to the federal government and is not specifically denied to state governments remains in the hands of state governments. And the Constitution had never given the rules, age rules, for being able to vote. And because of that, that decision was in the hands of the states. But the 26th Amendment takes it out of the hands of the states and gives it to the national government. And it makes the minimum voting age 18. Now, why was it felt important to change the voting age down to 18? Well, first of all, you got to look at the year that it was ratified, and that'll give you a clue. It was ratified in 1971. What was happening in United States history in 1971 that involved young people? It's called the Vietnam War, right? It's always been this case. Old people like me start wars, but young people like you have to fight them. It's always been like that. Old guys don't go and fight. the question was being asked. Remember, the Vietnam War was a very unpopular war, right? Good soldiers, unpopular war. The question became more and more common in the middle of an unpopular war. Shouldn't the young people, and it was young men mostly then, some women in not in combat roles like now, but some women in Vietnam, it's true. But the question became, if I'm going to give my life for my country, to support a policy of my country, shouldn't I have some role in choosing the people who are going to vote to send me off to war? And that is a legitimate question, folks. If I'm going to die for my country, shouldn't I have some say-so in choosing the people who are going to send me off, possibly to die? And the result was the 26th Amendment. Now, because it's part of the United States Constitution, all American citizens can vote on the day they turn 18 or later. Now, let me fuss at you for just a little bit and tell you that one of the age groups that votes the least is this age group. It's that between 18 and 25 cohort, the 18 to 25 group is the group that votes the least. And I say, shame on you if you are in that group, and you know if you are or not. If you're not in that group, I say good for you. But if you are in that group, shame on you. So neither the United States can keep anybody voting because of their age, and the states, neither can the states do that. The United States and the states have to recognize the right of Americans to vote from the age of 18 up. And of course, Section 2 says the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. All right, here we are, the last amendment, the 27th Amendment. The 27th Amendment has, I mean, most of these amendments have fascinating backstories, and that's also true of the 27th Amendment. Go with me in your memory back to our discussion of the creation of the Bill of Rights. We said that James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights. He truly is the father of the Bill of Rights. And that Madison had the Bill of Rights in his pocket when he gets to New York, because he's elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from the state of Virginia. So he's in New York when the Congress meets that very, very, very first time. And remember, he's a Federalist. And the Federalists have surrendered to the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists have said, okay, you win. As soon as the Congress meets, we promise, we give our word that we will create a Bill of Rights. Well, Madison knew that story, and so he got busy, and he had a Bill of Rights. He had what he thought was a pretty good Bill of Rights by the time the first Congress meets. And what we've said was that he had created 12 potential amendments. And the Congress liked all 12 of them. They approved all 12 of them, and they sent those 12 proposed amendments out to the states for ratification or not. And the states liked 10 of them, but they didn't like 2. And that's why what we refer to our Bill of Rights today consists of 10 amendments. All right, but the story's not over. That happens in 1789. In 1992, more than 200 years after the Bill of Rights was created, a young grad